Good evening, good afternoon, and welcome to the Civil Diplomacy Center, North and East Syria, organization of the second digital panel on Zoom. The key theme for this evening or afternoon will be the importance of Abdullah Ocalan as an alternative paradigm in resolving the Kurdish issue. I will introduce all the guests that are here with us today on this esteemed panel. Myself, Mahmoud Patel, representing the Kurdish Human Rights Action Group in South Africa, Comrade and Ms. Laura Quagliuolo, Dr. Thoreau Redcrow, a global analyst and an anti-imperialist of note, and like Comrade Quagliuolo, also very in tune with the Kurdish issues and challenges in the region. Mr. Simon Dubbins, who is the director of the International Research Department of Unite the Union, the largest trade union organization in the United Kingdom. And then, of course, an esteemed leader and a veteran in the Kurdish movement, Mr. Salih Muslim, who is a member of the Presidential Committee of the Democratic Union Party. The panel proceedings would be as follows. Each one of us will present between 10 and 15 minutes. I will go first, thereafter followed by Ms. Laura Quagliuolo, and then Dr. Thoreau Redcrow, followed by Mr. Simon Dubbins, and lastly, Mr. Salih Muslim. At the end of that, there will be a closing and concluding remarks to bring about the end of the presentations as well as the international Zoom platform for the Civil Diplomacy Center of North and East Syria. So I will proceed now, and I will focus primarily on the initiative done in South Africa with the COSATU Trade Union, the Congress of South African Trade Unions, which is the largest trade union in South Africa, together with the Kurdish Human Rights Action Group, which has been in South Africa since the arrest, incarceration, and imprisonment of Abdullah Ocalan in February 1999 till today. This initiative is the second one initiated by the Kurdish Human Rights Action Group in South Africa. A decade ago, there was a campaign that became part of the international campaign where millions of signatures were gathered in support to address through the United Nations and international institutions. This particular one is titled and themed as "The Time Has Come, Freedom for Abdullah Ocalan for a Just Peace in Turkey, and more importantly for the whole region." We look at him as a key and pivotal figure, and the key objective is to promote a just and peaceful resolution in the whole region. President Erdogan's authoritarian regime has in the last few years pursued an internal and external policy of expansionism and aggression. These expansionist policies have negatively affected the Kurds in Turkey, Syria, Iraq, as well as in Iran and the rest of the diaspora. And this has undermined all peace attempts in the Middle East, North Africa, the Caucasus, and in Europe. The freedom then of Abdullah Ocalan is the legitimate, and as the legitimate representative of the Kurdish people, is essential to pave the way for peace in Turkey and the region. And we know this from our own experience in South Africa, that the release of the legitimate and credible leadership is inevitable and a necessary precondition for any peace process. International criticism of Turkey for its ongoing abuse of human rights and its expansionist policies has increased. We understand that Turkey is a member of the United Nations, and as a member of the UN, flagrantly violates all its policies as well as its projects with regards to peace in the region. And it's a fundamental threat to peace and stability in today's world. And we know that these repeated incursions into northeastern Syria, targeting the Kurdish people, destroying infrastructure, targeting heritage sites, waging campaigns and weaponizing the supply of water. In March 2018, Turkey occupied the Kurdish city of Afrin and surrounding areas in northeast Syria. The UN failed to condemn the Turkish invasion as an occupation and failed to take any action against it. And Turkey then sees it as carte blanche to continue its occupation policies to date. Therefore, the international campaign that was started with Kosatu and us in the Kurdish Human Rights Action Group is targeted to the United Nations to say, listen, this is a member and a founder member of the United Nations who is flagrantly violating all international norms and conventions, including international instruments. Therefore, it's incumbent on you to pull into line this particular member of yours whose genocidal, expansionist, and ethnic cleansing has become legion in the region. The United Nations Independent and International Commission of Inquiry on the Syrian Arab Republic published a 25-page report on the 14th of August, 2020. It presented its findings resulting from an investigation conducted between the 11th of January and the 1st of July in 2020. The report documents how Turkish-backed Syrian national armies have committed war crimes, hostage-taking, cruel treatment, torture, and rape in Afrin and surrounding areas. The Turkish state's domestic and foreign policy is characterized by misogyny, discrimination, and oppression. The Turkish state and its military have established record systematic and grave human rights violations against imperial religious minorities, including Yazidis, Christians, Alawites, and defenders of human rights and democratic opposition, including those of the Islamic faith. These are just a few examples of how Turkey, a UN member state, is willfully ignoring its international obligations. In the last year alone, many international organizations, including those who have endorsed and signed our campaign throughout Europe, as well as in South Africa, and other solidarity partners in the world, civic organizations, individuals, as well as key parliamentarians in Europe and elsewhere that have endorsed the campaign directed to the United Nations. The Council of Europe, the European Council, NATO, and the Arab League, as well as the UN Human Rights Council, held special meetings on issues to report and rightly condemn Turkey's democracy backsliding and human rights violations. We believe that the time has come to urge Turkey to comply with its international obligations according to international humanitarian law, human rights, and to particularly abide by UN treaties. The lobbying has taken place through all our civic organizations, those political parties that are progressive and in solidarity, the African National Congress, the Communist Party of South Africa, as well as other NGOs that are involved in community work within the Republic and outside of the Republic. And that includes organizations led and focused on rights of women and championing the rights of women, because we know Abdullah Ocalan, as the leader and undisputed leader of the Kurdish people, is one of the foremost thinkers and revolutionaries in contemporary time to set forth a policy, a vision, as well as an ideology that speaks to the emancipation of women, not only namesake and lip service, but to be the key drivers of change and be the agents of change and power for themselves, as well as the communities and the cities and countries in which they are in. And the best example we have of that today is in what we refer to as Rojava, or referred to as northeastern Syria. The Turkish government has declared martial law, abrogated international law with respect to Kurds in Turkey. The Turkish armed forces constantly and systematically attack Kurdish areas in northern East Syria and in northern Iraq with impunity, risking the lives of civilians, building and maintaining bases and outposts in the region. This is a blatant violation against the principle of national sovereignty, which the UN sought and seeks to uphold. This impunity, the violation of Abdullah Ocalan's rights as a prisoner, him being the sole inmate in solitary confinement conditions, is an absolute travesty of justice for a legitimate, politically represented leader such as Mr. Abdullah Ocalan. His quest and unconditional offerings for reaching a peaceful solution while being under such traverse conditions still smacks in the face of the state of Turkey continuously reneging on taking any action to resolve the issue diplomatically, peacefully, politically, even with neutral third parties to be interlocutors to bring about a peace process. The first step must be the immediate release of Abdullah Ocalan. not alone improving his prison conditions, but to release him. In South Africa, we did not negotiate until Mr. Nelson Mandela was released unconditionally. Yet, Abdullah Ocalan, under such conditions, still offers the olive branch. These uncompromising policies of the Turkish government and their aggressive actions as a member of NATO, who refused to stand for dialogue and promote peace initiatives, the Kurdish people's legitimate demands for a peaceful and democratic solution must be supported, must be given solidarity to, and mobilization internationally must be relentless and not a step back, but a step forward. Remember, the Committee for Prevention of Torture of Council confirmed the assertions that Mr. Ocalan's inhumane prison conditions in their August 2020 report included the discussion of Imrali F-type, and where he's been held since 1999. And it has said that such a state of affairs, to quote from that document, is not acceptable and contravenes various relevant international human rights standards. Turkey's law on the execution of sentences and security measures was found by the CPT to be fundamentally flawed and should be revised not only at Imrali prison, but in their entire prison system. This, we recall the UN rapporteur, Juan Mendez, to the UN Assembly in October 2011, where he stated that solitary confinement can amount to torture, cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment or punishment when used as punishment, and called on all countries to ban this practice, except in very exceptional circumstances, where it should be for the shortest possible time. Yet, Abdullah Ocalan languishes there on the island of Imrali under these conditions, inhumane conditions. Therefore, our campaign has mobilized along those lines all progressive forces in South Africa, organizations and individuals, to continuously and be relentless with the United Nations, NATO, as well as other organizations globally that have the ability to put pressure on the state of Turkey. We have also put pressure on our government to stand up for its foreign policy, where it states clearly that there must be a peaceful solution in Turkey and the release of Abdullah Ocalan and all political prisoners. On that note, I thank you for paying attention and listening to me on our campaign and the key issues that it has covered. And without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Comrade Laura Quagliuolo, who will continue with her presentation. Thank you, comrades.
Hello, good evening to everybody. And first of all, I want to thank the Civil Diplomacy Center, North and East Syria, for inviting me to this important meeting. And also I want to thank the International Initiative, Peace in Kurdistan, for asking me to participate in the Imrali international virtual delegation that took place on 14 and 15 of February. Myself, I'm an activist of Rete Jin, an all-women Italian organization that is supporting the Kurdish women's movement, and a member of the Italian committee, Time Has Come, Freedom for Abdullah Ocalan, a committee that has collected now 100 signatures from politicians, from unionists, from lawyers, from magistrates, and prominent personality in the art and culture, beside activists, of course. And this campaign is working at the political level, both trying to involve Italian and European MPs and organizing public events. Of course, with the pandemic is, on Zoom or other ways like this, but we are thinking as soon as it will be possible to organize even other things. In Italy, we feel very close to Ocalan because when he came in 1998, he stayed in Italy for 2 months. We worked very hard to grant him an asylum, and we created a large support movement to assist him and the Kurdish and also to assist the Kurdish freedom movement. The people taking part in that support movement 20 years ago, 22 years ago, never ceased to do solidarity work. And at the time I was participating, I'm still very active, and this is why I'm honored. I was honored to participate in the IMRALI delegation this year. One thing I want to add about this, maybe not many of you know, that in an Italian court granted the asylum to Ocalan the day after he was abducted to Kenya and then arrested. And now what we are trying to do is also demanding for him to come back to Italy and have his right granted, you know. And I explain you more or less how it was the virtual, the virtual delegation. We were 10 members, including politicians, trade unionists, academics, lawyers, social movement activists from several countries: Iceland, India, Italy, the US, the UK. And the idea, even if virtually, was to continue the work of the previous delegation without having to stop that work due to the pandemic. And the main goal of this delegation is to support the reopening of the peace process between the Turkish government and the Kurdish movement, which has ended in 2015. And as we have understood from the people we were listening to, it is of an extreme importance for the movement in Turkey, for the Kurdish movement, and also for the movement around the world, for this process to start again and to receive support. And for all this movement inside, it is very important to receive support from outside Turkey. During the delegation, we met with Kurdish politicians from HDP, DTK. We listened to representatives of the women movement, the TJA, trade union leaders, human rights activists, lawyers association, prisoners association, and members of the Abdullah Ocalan legal team. And the picture that came out is really about human rights in Turkey, is really, you know, atrocious. Many women organizations were shut down, and all the women's social rights were restricted. And the Turkish government has targeted especially the activists. And all the activists face any kind of abuses like rape, torture, kidnapping, all of these by police authorities, you know, uniform authorities. And the co-chair system that was adopted in particular in Baku and in some other areas of Turkey, and that was one of the major tools for women to be represented and get organized. It was a way to create an alternative to the current system, and it's been, you know, dismantled. So the majority of the HDP majors have been replaced by the government with trustees affiliated to AKP. And once again, you know, AKP, Erdogan don't accept democracy and try to rule with an iron fist every region which voted against him. And about women, the TJA representatives stressed that shutdown, ban, illegalization of structures that women could turn in the event of violence were shut down and made women more vulnerable to violence, especially domestic violence. And she added that during the peace process, the women movement reached several goals toward the realization of a democratic confederal model. And the Kurdish movement theorized this system for a long time, thanks to Ocalan ideas, which were put into practice. And as I mentioned, in the past year, we have seen a huge spike of people being arrested with fake accusation. Their treatment is behind any treaties which Turkey has been signed as a part of the international community. And in fact, political prisoners are tortured on regular basis. They don't have visit rights. They can't meet with their lawyers, nor with their family. They don't have even access to healthcare. And in the meantime, lawyers are charged for defending their clients, and the independence of the judiciary is being undermined. The majority of the judges just obey to the orders of Ocalan, of Erdogan regime. As far as political parties are concerned, over the past few years, thousands of the HDP members have been arrested, and many have been subjected to threats by security forces, asked to spy. And when such requests have been denied, they were kidnapped and tortured. And also trade union members, human rights defenders face very serious problems like judicial harassment, and in the case of arrest and detention, and as well as court cases. And moreover, administrative investigation and dislocation are used to put pressure on the trade union members. And so the public authorities do not hesitate to criminalize, defame the trade union activists, the leaders especially, even if these rights are under the protection of national and international laws. So also, as far as students are concerned, the student protests in last January in the University of Bogazici, I don't know if I'm pronouncing well, they took the streets because, the state appointed a rector that was a pro-AKP, and they were arrested and, tortured, put into prisons. Let's not talk about the press freedom, which is not existent, and all the newspapers that are, in dissent with the regime are shut down. So in short, everyone who opposes the regime is considered a terrorist, is judged under the law of anti-terrorism, anti-terrorism law. All the people we have listened to linked the deterioration of human rights across the country with the intensification of the isolation regime of Abdullah Ocalan. And they all said that the immoralist system of isolation spill over throughout all the country. So all the country, everyone feels isolated. The Turkish state is well aware of the impact that Ocalan, the ideas of Ocalan have on the Kurdish people and on the world, let's say, on many people around the world. And this is why they want to isolate this idea and are trying to suppress any demand of democracy in the country. And in fact, in the past, when Ocalan had the opportunity to express himself, the road for a democratic solution and peace process opened. And this makes clear once again that the AKP and Erdogan, of course, they do not want to pursue the path of freedom and democracy. Of course, the resistance of the Kurdish freedom movement is fierce and is based on the principles of Abdullah Ocalan. Get organized, defend yourself, and study. And so they are applying this principle, getting strength from this principle and resisting every kind of attacks. The women, for example, are struggling to assert their rights, and especially after the Turkish state withdrew from the Istanbul Convention, which is once again a sign on how the Turkish state is chasing a war on women. And 3 months ago, many political prisoners started a non-indefinite new hunger strike. You know, you probably remember and know very well about the indefinite one started by Leila Guven that, you know, achieved a little results, you know, short results. You know, it was initiated by Leila Guven, but continued in the prisons and even amongst the Kurdish communities in Europe. I end by, you know, mentioning the Answering Law Office, and they released a report in 2020, which refers about the situation in Imrali as one of absolute isolation, which constitutes a form of systematic torture. And they added also that the isolation is so fierce because Mr. Ocalan articulation of democratic nation solution, it's a great solution for the Middle East, not only for the Kurds, but for the coexistence of all peoples. And we must underline that the Imrali system of isolation and torture is shaped not only by the Turkish legal system, but also by the illegal practices of the international legal system that has a huge responsibility. And I think that Mr. Comrade Patel has explained very well, you know, which are the responsibilities of you know, the international community and especially Europe, because Turkey is a member of the, you know, Council of Europe, so they should respond even and you know, obey somehow to the reports. I mean, take note of the reports of the CPT, for example, and you know, try to meet the requests. Anyway, the possibility of a democratic solution is embodied in the person of Abdullah Ocalan. And in these 22 years of imprisonment, we took every opportunity to raise the possibility of a peaceful and democratic solution. And of course, the revolution in Northeast Syria is a revolution that is giving hope and inspiration to millions of people around the world, and is the only real alternative to capitalism. And it would have never been possible without the analysis and the philosophy of Mr. Abdullah Ocalan and the decades of struggle and organizing within the PKK. So I believe that this is the reason why he's kept in such an unhuman condition while all the world is in silence or, you know, is not enough careful to the violation of the Turkish state. So we all should intensify our efforts in order to make Ocalan's voice to be heard and for his liberation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Comrade Laura, for that lucid exposition and the role you played at the Imrali delegations, as well as your insight elicited with the participants and those that you interviewed, together with all the human rights violations that are continuously being perpetuated by the AKP and the Turkish state in particular. It is now important that we move on to our next presenter, and that is Dr. Thoreau Redcrow. Dr. Redcrow, as they would say, the floor is yours. Please proceed and go ahead.
Thank you. I want to first express my appreciation to the Civil Diplomacy Center and all of our distinguished speakers here today. Rather than go over many of the things that the other speakers will talk about, I think it's very important to first, to understand the paradigm of Abdullah Ocalan, you have to look at the creation of the material and historical conditions that made him arise. Ocalan often talks about that Turkey's afraid of being confronted with the past. And that's because when you look at Turkey's past, you understand that the rise of Ocalan was inevitable based on the conditions that the Kurds were living under in southeastern Turkey or northern Kurdistan. The first lie that the Turkish state often perpetuates is the idea that if there wasn't a PKK, you know, there wouldn't be the sort of counterinsurgency efforts by the Turkish state. But what we see is that long before the PKK was founded in 1978, you had the Armenian genocide, the Greek genocide, the Assyrian genocide, the Dersim massacre. You had, in Dersim, you had women jumping off of cliffs to avoid being massacred by Turkish soldiers. Sheikh Said was hanged during that time. Thousands of villages throughout northern Kurdistan were renamed by the Turkish state long before, decades before there was a PKK. And these events all occurred even before Öcalan was ever born. Ironically, even Öcalan's own name, Öcalan, which means avenger, comes from a relative of his that was killed during the Sheikh Said rebellion. So even in his name itself, which the Turkish state often doesn't mention, they'll often refer to him as Emrali or some epithet. Even his own name shows how the creation of him is rooted in history. And because I think that biography is fate, to understand his paradigm, you have to look at the biography of Öcalan himself. As a young man, it wasn't that he had a developed Kurdish identity, but as a young person, he noticed that there was large landlords throughout Omerli and the area where he lived. And the Kurds there were oppressed by the Aghaz. And these were basically the large landowners who only paid women $1.50 a day and men $2 a day to work the land. And Öcalan's family could only afford to send him to school of all of the rest of his siblings, a school which he was made to walk an hour to every day. And as a child, his sister Hava was essentially married off, or you could even say sold off, to a man for a few sacks of wheat and money. And so it's in this biographical event that you understand the appreciation for that led to the rise of the Yaja Star and the Yepreje, because it's really the YPJ comes out of this sort of event in Öcalan's early life, where he sees that if his sister could be traded off in this way, what conditions are the other women facing? Later, when Öcalan is working at the government office in 1969, he's basically measuring land deeds. And in doing this, he recognizes who owns all the land and who doesn't. And he's seeing these conditions that the people are under. And so, shortly after that, when you combine these conditions with the fact that he was in the early 70s, he's going to these events where they're raising Kurdish consciousness. And he's arrested for handing out materials, and he's charged with this very Orwellian crime called minority racism. It's really a crime that the Turkish state only has. And essentially the crime says that a member of a minority race is not allowed to demand special demands of the majority race. Now, of course, when they say special demands, what they mean is not being killed, not being called a mountain Turk, not having your identity denied, not having your villages burned down. So this is really the idea of what they call, minority racism in Turkey. And so Öcalan is arrested during this time. And when you combine that with the hanging of Deniz Gezmesh in 1972, who himself wasn't even Kurdish, but Turkish, then Öcalan starts to realize, okay, there is something at play here. And it's not just an issue of Kurdishness, it's an issue of the Turkish state itself and the conditions that they're putting on the people. This is how you get a situation where when the original 20 students in 1977 get together, they had already recruited, over time, about 300 other people, and in very intense one-on-one conversations. Öcalan and his comrades were basically going village by village and talking to people and recruiting them in a very slow process and making them see the conditions that they were facing. And this is how you go from 20 people to 300 people, to within 15 years, you have 15,000 guerrillas and 50,000 supporters in Europe. A movement cannot do this. You cannot go from 20 people to 50,000 supporters in a little over a decade unless there are the conditions that lead to everyone being, going to your movement and seeing the legitimacy of your cause. Now, obviously, when you ask, well, what was the Turkish state doing to increase all of the recruitment in the PKK? Well, they were burning villages, raping women, abusing the locals. They essentially had a group, Jaitem death squads, who went through the cities and just openly assassinated people. And in my own field research throughout Turkey, I interviewed many people during this time, and they said these Jaitem assassins would essentially just walk up in the middle of the street and assassinate people, and there was no one to call. How do you call the police on the police when the police are the ones doing the murdering? They were abusing politicians, arresting their leaders. Essentially, every Kurdish party that was created from the 1980s to now was outlawed one by one. The famous newspaper Özgür Gündem, which was reporting on all of these, had their journalists assassinated and murdered throughout this time. And so this is why, when you combine it as well, there were plans by the Turkish state to basically construct dams to drown out the areas where the guerrillas were in the mountains, as we saw recently with Hassan Cave, which the Turkish state put underwater. So when you understand these conditions, and you see that the PKK essentially arose out of the Diyarbakir prison number 5, and these were atrocious conditions. I mean, conditions that you can't even imagine, where people being tortured, eating bars of soap with razor blades in them, made to lick the floor, bite the heads off of live rats. Famously, Gulten Kishnak, who later became the mayor of Ahmed, she was made to sleep in the dog cage of the prison warden. They were made to drink laundry detergent, had their fingernails torn out. I mention all of these atrocious crimes because you have to understand it's the crimes that lead to people deciding, I would rather go to the mountains and take an AK-47 and fight against impossible odds rather than live under a state who will do these things to me. And so that's why it's very important to understand these conditions that lead to this. Oftentimes after these tortures, they were made to sing the Turkish national anthem. So the Turkish guards would dunk them into vats of excrement and then make them come out and sing the Turkish national anthem after experiencing these abuses. When you understand these conditions, you didn't see why someone like Muslim Duan would light himself on fire, as he famously did on Nairoz, and why Nairoz now, the fires in Nairoz would have such a symbolic importance to the Kurdish movement, essentially, rebirth through fire like a phoenix. And so, to understand democratic confederalism, the reason why I go over these conditions is because they're actually rooted in the conditions that created, this movement. When Ocalan is, developing the idea of democratic confederalism, obviously he's using lots of different theorists that I'll mention here, and you can look up on your own time. Murray Bookchin, obviously, leftist Foucauldians, critical Marxists, Fernand Braudel, Emmanuel Wallerstein, Benedict Anderson, and his idea of imagined communities. He took some inspiration from Chiapas in Mexico and Subcomandante Marcos. The Switzerland model, this is the reason why you have the name of Canton in Rojava or northeastern Syria based on this idea of local control. And essentially the democratic confederalism idea, which was, they wanted a multicultural, anti-monopolistic, and consistent consensus-oriented ideology that would provide space for people's historical heritage. Now, when you've experienced these conditions, as the Kurds had in northern Kurdistan, you would see why protecting one's historical heritage would be so important. And because of the multi-ethnicity of the region, you understand that this is why the democratic confederalism creates a space for everybody to represent their own ethnicity. And as I spoke about, again, women's freedom being a very important aspect, breaking this colonial servitude. And it's this combination of women's freedom, social ecology, which is focused on sustainability, self-defense. This is where you get the groups like the Civil Defense Forces, the YPG and the YPG and the other KCK sort of armed units, and the co-chair system, where you have one man and one woman in all positions of power. Also in northeastern Syria, you have the cooperatives, and so this kind of communal economy and how things should be organized. To address some important aspects, I think, especially for a Western English-speaking audience, because they're not usually confronted with a lot of these ideas, I wanted to address a couple things that the Turkish state will talk about with Ocalan. First, they often speak of his crimes, and you have to ask yourself, what are the crimes that he's actually committed? Is it a crime to demand language rights, to demand that 20 million Kurds should be able to speak in Kurdish? Is it a crime to expect that the Turkish state shouldn't burn down 4,000 Kurdish villages, that they shouldn't have village guards where they basically force Kurds to take up arms against other Kurds in their region and fight against the guerrillas? Is it a crime to resist, groups like Hezbollah Contra and the fascist Grey Wolves in Turkey who are constantly attacking the Kurdish population there? And when you understand these crimes and you compare that with what Ocalan's demands have always been, in 1998, before Ocalan was arrested, he basically essentially said that he only wanted the same conditions that the Basque and ETA or the IRA were being offered at the time. And he said he wanted an end to the military occupation of Kurdish villages, that he wanted a return of displaced Kurdish refugees, the elimination of the village guards, as I spoke about, autonomy for Kurds in the region without harming Turkey's borders, a recognition of Kurdish identity, and freedom of religion. Now, these are all things that the West says they believe in, and these were basically his demands in 1998. But yet, the Western countries, when he was fleeing and trying to find safe haven, offered him no safe haven at the time. Now, obviously, when you look at the history back then, you understand why this is. Why was the United States, and I say this as an American, it was shameful in the way that the United States assisted in his own capture. And when you realize that it came 2 years after they had signed a massive weapons deal where the Clinton administration at the time had essentially agreed to sell hundreds of millions of dollars of weaponry to Turkey and Cobra attack helicopters, and listed the PKK as a terrorist organization during this exact time. So the PKK had been carrying out a guerrilla war for 13 years prior to that, and the United States hadn't considered them a terrorist. And it was only when the United States wanted to sell millions of dollars in weaponry that they suddenly listed the PKK as a terrorist organization. Now, the following year, Ocalan is obviously arrested and he's held in isolation for 100 days, as Dr. Patel has discussed. And you can even see in that very moment, his first lawyer, Quagliuolo, was not even a PKK supporter. In fact, he didn't support Ocalan, but he saw that in trying Ocalan, they were essentially trying the Kurdish people themselves. Ocalan had come to personify the Kurdish cause itself. And by putting him on trial and making him stand in a glass cage and have everyone scream at him and basically delegitimizing the entire Kurdish movement, it wasn't him that was on trial. It was the aspirations of 20 million Kurds in northern Kurdistan. So you have to say, what would a world without the PKK look like? Because this is obviously, Turkey says, oh, well, if the PKK wasn't here, everything would be fine. Well, we see what a world without the PKK would look like, and it's in Afrin right now, in northwestern Syria, where Turkey has taken over Afrin with their jihadist mercenaries, and they've essentially created a hell on earth filled with rapes, kidnappings, extortion, torture, grave robbing, organ harvesting, sexual slavery camps. They've stolen 500,000 olive trees. They bulldoze the Alevi and Yazidi shrines constantly. And so this is what northern Kurdistan or southeastern Turkey would look like if there was not a PKK and if there was no armed force to protect the Kurdish population there. We see it in Afrin. So it sort of provides a nice, incubator to see what would a world look like if Kurds had never risen up and taken up arms. So in my last few minutes here, what I would say is what's important is that the US needs to delist the PKK, first of all. The PKK has never killed a single American citizen. They've never attacked the United States. They've never even spoken out against the United States. And in fact, if you look at recent speeches, and there was even a letter in the Washington Post, they've said that they have nothing against the United States. In fact, there's no reason for the United States to even view them as an enemy, as they've never attacked the US. In fact, it should be Turkey that should be considered an enemy of the United States if you look at the recent policies that they've had. Also, it's disingenuous in the way that the US uses terror lists. They recently added and removed the Houthis, and they utilize MEK in Iran and all of these different groups. They manipulate this terror list as a means for their own proxies. And essentially why they should do that is because the KCK model is a model for the entire Middle East. And it's everything that the United States says that they support. They say that they support secularism, women's rights, religious pluralism, and this is encompassed within the KCK and with Ocalan's model. So I would say that it's very important, I hope by correcting some of these facts, people realize that the situation is not as obviously presented in the media. And Ocalan is an aging person at this time, and it's my hope that Turkey will not miss this opportunity to release him from prison and negotiate with him in the same way that South Africa did with Nelson Mandela, as our friend Mr. Patel is very aware of. Because if Ocalan were to die in prison, there will be no other person who can make that peace deal. He is the only figure that has the sort of trusted authority amongst the population to inevitably create a form of reconciliation. And all he's asked for is that a truth and reconciliation is established in the same way as South Africa was. And basically he should be released from prison and made and open into negotiations with the Turkish state, because that's really the only path for peace. And so anyone who says that they want peace in the situation, and it doesn't begin with the immediate release of Abdullah Ocalan and allowing him to negotiate with the Turkish state on equal terms, is lying. They don't want peace. What they want is the continued oppression of 20 million Kurds in northern Kurdistan. And so it's my hope, obviously, that is the case. And I would close that Ocalan has often talked about how he wanted to found a republic of humanity. And I would point out, although this issue is very connected to Kurds, it's important to realize that it's not just Kurdish liberation that he's speaking about. The KCK model in northeastern Syria has freed and provided opportunities for everyone: the Assyrians, the Armenians, the Arabs, all of the local population there. And so this KCK model could really be a model for the entire Middle East, but it must start with his release from prison and with the continual, with the United States removing the PKK from the terrorist list so that this can come about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Redcrow. Your salient points in your presentation, from the historical to the materialist conditions that have shaped Abdullah Ocalan as an individual, as well as his contributions together in the mobilization and organization that led into the guerrilla movement of the PKK as a bulwark and resistance against Turkish fascism, imperialism, and gross human rights violations for the decades thereafter and as we speak. And your analysis with regards to taking an individual and using that individual as an exemplar for the rest of his people that becomes subject to something that they claim is illegal or anti-terrorism, when in fact, like with us during apartheid, the laws themselves had no legitimacy. They were illegal. And in that way, you've made it clear to our listeners from Europe and North America, South, as well as all your other English-speaking listeners, that Abdullah Ocalan is the legitimate and rightful key to emancipation for his people and peaceful resolution for Turkey and the region. Thank you, Dr. Redcrow. I now would like to ask our Mr. Simon Dubbins, who is no stranger to us in the Kurdish movement, as well as in the Congress and trade union movements internationally, to please take the floor and present your presentation to us and share with us your experience and your insight with your campaign that you have led and were part of previously as well as currently. Thank you, Mr. Simon Dubbins. Please proceed.
Thank you very much, Mahmoud, and thanks to the Civil Democratic Society for the invitation. It's a pleasure and a privilege, as always, to share a platform with you all. I don't want to repeat any of the comments that you and Thoreau and Laura have already made, except to underline that I 100% support all of the points that you've made and would underline them completely. As you rightly say, Mahmoud, I'm from Unite the Union. I'm co-chair of the trade union Freedom for Öcalan campaign, and I wanted to just share a few thoughts and our experiences with you in the hope that it builds on the other contributions and encourages other people to get involved with this absolutely critical campaign for the freedom of Mr. Öcalan. The trade union movement in the UK has got a long and proud history of standing shoulder to shoulder with oppressed peoples, the downtrodden. In fact, I'm proud to say, Mahmoud, that we were at the forefront of the anti-apartheid struggle, as I'm sure you're aware. Right now, we stand shoulder to shoulder with the Palestinians. We've always stood with the people that have suffered in Colombia, and we've stood shoulder to shoulder with the Cubans and many, many others. So there has been a history of support for the Kurdish people and a recognition of the oppression that they've suffered. But I think it's true to say it wasn't particularly big and broad as it is now. It was always there, but never had really developed hugely. I think what really changed was around the time of 2014, when a lot of the wider public and our wider membership really looked on in utter horror at what was going on in Kobani and the onslaught of ISIS. And they were really inspired by the bravery of the people resisting ISIS, many of them women, and many of them not Kurds as well, from other ethnic backgrounds and so on. And at the same time, they were utterly disgusted that a state like Turkey, a NATO member state, was not only not doing anything to help the Kurds, but was clearly actively supporting ISIS and doing all it could to make sure Kobani and the other Kurdish cities would fall. So we really looked at, what do we do now to really express our solidarity and try and bring about change. And to be honest, we talked at length about how best to do it. It's a complicated picture. Kurds are divided in different states. The picture is complex and not simple to understand. But it was clear, I think it was Thoreau it mentioned as well, that Öcalan actually really embodies that struggle in all its different elements and its different areas. And so for us, it was clear it had to be focused around freedom for Öcalan. We were also aware of the period in which the peace negotiations had been happening, improvements were taking place, and that course had so viciously been abandoned, and the return to war was the agenda of Öcalan. So we set up our campaign in 2016. I travelled shortly before that to Diyarbakir and witnessed firsthand what the Turkish state was doing in the Sur district at the same time when they were attacking Cizre and Silopi and the other cities. And having been to places like Palestine and Colombia, I thought I knew what I was letting myself in for, only to come back utterly astonished at the level of violence and brutality that was being meted out. We're really pleased that our solidarity campaign has grown dramatically now. We have 15 of the UK's biggest unions signed up. Our confederation, which is not always, to be honest, the most radical confederation, has a very, very clear position of demanding freedom for Öcalan and has been active in promoting that as well. We have two big events in our calendar in the Labour movement, festivals and gatherings. 200,000 people gather every year at the Durham Miners. And we were really pleased in 2018, the Durham Miners said, we want freedom for Öcalan to be the international theme of our festival. A year later, the other big festival in Tolpadul said exactly the same. And there's no doubt there's a wider understanding and a wider knowledge now of how important it is. I think it culminated at the end of 2019 when 800 delegates at our conference all held up a picture of Abdullah Öcalan individually and made a collective action demanding his freedom. I have to say, it's not always easy getting shop floor members to understand why this is important for them. And we have a lot of education and awareness raising to do. We always appeal to their basic humanity and say, look, the treatment of Abdullah Öcalan, and in fact, all political prisoners, is utterly outrageous, but the condemnation by the Committee for the Prevention of Torture, the absolute denial of access to lawyers and families clearly constitutes torture, and on a simple humanitarian basis, it is utterly unacceptable. But most importantly, we really try to hammer it home that in the interest of their own security in the UK, the battle against ISIS and extremism, the need for stability in the region to try and deal with the humanitarian crisis and the refugee crisis, a solution must be found. And it is Abdullah Öcalan and his approach and his ideas that offer the only realistic solution that will bring about a proper and lasting peace in the region. But there's a more basic factor as well. We in the trade union movement understand the Kurdish political movement shares our values. They share the values of equality, inclusiveness, democracy, peace, women's rights. These are our values. So we make it clear to our membership, and they in turn hopefully push it out to their colleagues at work. We are not neutral in what is going on in the Middle East. We are not neutral bystanders. We stand shoulder to shoulder with the struggle of the Kurdish people. We demand the liberation of Abdullah Öcalan, and we will continue to build our solidarity further. We always have not just limited it only to Mr. Öcalan's freedom. We've obviously engaged beyond that. We send delegations. I've had the privilege to to be with Salih and others in northeastern Syria. We send observers to trials in Turkey. We've been pushing our MPs to call and to undertake investigations as to what is going on in Turkey. And I'm very pleased to say, despite COVID, we've managed to keep doing that and keep building it as well. I think the critical thing to just conclude, Mahmoud, for us, Öcalan's perspectives and freedoms are absolutely vital for the future, not just of the Kurdish people, but of the wider region. And we would argue for the wider humanity itself. I said before, and I re-emphasize it again, it's based on the right values, based on our values: peace, democracy, inclusiveness, women's rights. Öcalan himself has written from prison in the traditions of some of the great thinkers like Gramsci and others. And he has, I think, an almost unparalleled historical understanding of the reality of the situation in that region. And much of his proposals are based on that very, very deep historical understanding and of the realities. I think it's a major, major contribution that Öcalan has made to say, let's get away from trying to find solutions purely based on nation states, when actually nation states have been up most of the problem. And it distinguishes Öcalan's ideology from some of the more traditional independence movements. And for us on the left, I think it's been refreshing to actually have such a big thinker start to push forward our analysis and our understanding and free us from some of the straitjackets that we had in the past. But the number one thing as a trade unionist and a person of the left that has been proud all my life to stand shoulder to shoulder and to be part of our international movement is Öcalan and his ideology and the Kurdish movement offer the most important thing to all downtrodden and repressed people, and that is hope. And that is perspective, and that is the possibility of a better and brighter future. But as all the other speakers have said, we really have to build the international pressure. It is an outrage that Turkey is allowed to do what it's doing, not only in Turkey, but in Syria and in Libya and in Azerbaijan and in the Eastern Mediterranean. It is an outrage that the United States and the European Union and the UK and other countries continue to allow Erdogan to behave in the fascist authoritarian manner that he is doing. And none of us will cease until we see Abdullah Öcalan walk free and play only the role that he can play in bringing about peace and democracy and security to everybody in that region. Thank you, Mahmoud.
Thank you very much, Simon, for your exponential explanation, but more importantly, the clarion call that international solidarity, organizing and mobilizing must continue, be resolute, be relentless, because Abdullah Ocalan's humanity appeals to all of us and the values we all cherish: freedom, human dignity, equality, the rights of women, children, and our environment. And your connection with Gramsci and the thinkers of our time, of our living memories, and those who have contributed, I think, like you have said, and many other scholars from Wallerstein and so on, and like Dr. Redcrow has elucidated earlier, puts him above the others. He is the thinker of the third way, which is beyond nation states. Thank you very much for that, Simon. And without further ado, we welcome a veteran, a stalwart, and a leader of the Kurdish movement, Mr. Salih Muslim. We had the honor and privilege of hosting you in South Africa in 2016, and it was an absolutely educational as well as a learning experience for us in South Africa to have you with us. And it's an absolute honor to share this panel with you. And I would like you to please present and continue. The floor is yours, Mr. Muslim. Thank you.
Well, hi to everybody. Salute. I would like to say, first of all, I would like to thank Mahmoud Patel and all the participants, and also the civil diplomacy who arranged this event to share with you. I would like to thank them also. Actually, Mr. Ocalan and his role in the resolving the Kurdish issue, I think it should be taken from the beginning. Now, Mr. Ocalan, what he has done, as some of your participants mentioned, he was born in the village and he suffered what all the Kurdish people are suffering. So he understood what's going on, what's the problem. And then he tried to find another way because he thought maybe if he will think like the others, it's not the way to do something for their people. So first of all, he tried to free himself, free in will and free in mentality. As you know, maybe if you look at his history, first of all, he tried to study and learn the religious theories, the beginning. And then he didn't, so that is not a problem, it's not solving. And then he went to the socialism. He read a lot of books and so, and then, of course, I mean, he reading a lot. He found it's not the way. And when practical during the university, he found that what's going on is not the right thing. So he modified his own views to do it in 1973. As he mentions, he found a group, and this group should be free in mentality, should be free in will. And this is what he thought and he taught. And of course, as you mentioned, also this group became 20, became 200, and then maybe till 15,000 guerrillas in the mountains. Because the freedom, usually, I mean the freedom, the feeling of the freedom are contagious, pass from one to the others. So this is the way. And the Turkey is afraid of that because if you look at the history of Turkey, they have massacred, I mean, the Armenians, massacred the Syriacs, massacred the Romans and the others, and now what they believe that only the Turks can live and there is a Kurd and they should be finished too, because the mentality of Mr. Tayyip Erdogan and the others is to have Turkey with only the Turkish nation, Turkish language, Turkish flag, and it's not anybody is not acceptable. And because of that, of course, he's against everybody, and he dislikes any people think freely. And this mentality at this time in the Middle East is dangerous. It's not only for Turkey, it's for all the Middle East and also for the world. As you said, I mean, as a game of the politics, when the conflicts started in the Middle East, and those groups, they went to Europe. I mean, they excluded there. Daesh was in Europe. Daesh was in the United States and spread everywhere because the world became a small, village and everybody affected by each other. And this mentality of Erdogan is dangerous for everybody. Dangerous not only for Turkey, but also for the Middle East, and also for Europe, and also for all the world. So I think all the world and Europe, they should think of something to stop this approach by AKP and this fascism in Turkey. Otherwise, it's dangerous for everybody. This is what I can say. Mr. Ocalan, what he has done, he never held a weapon. He never killed. He never was in military. He was never has been a military commander at all, I mean. He was just theoretically teaching the people, that's all. His mentality, this one. Just making the people to feel free in will and in the mentality so they can change doing it. He never been a commander. He never ordered somebody to kill. Never. He's just a thinker. He summarized all the experience of the humanity, I mean, during centuries, from Marxism, from maybe Leninism, from Gramsci to Bookchin to the others, and he just summarized all the culture of those thinkers and just put all together as his freedom in his books, in his experience. So this is, I think, is a valuable thing for all the people. They should do it. I mean, they should respect it, they should follow it, they should know it, and he should be free to do it. Now, there is something else. I mean, everybody should know. We are talking about the international laws and international organizations and maybe civil society organizations. They can make a pressure on Turkey. Turkey never care of any one of those. Never cared. Because we are talking about CPT, for example. CPT is an organization to prevent torture, not to watch it and report it. They should prevent it. They should do something to stop this torture. And never, even the reports are not coming out. The others, I mean, for Europe, well, you say, I mean, there is massacres, hundreds of thousands of people are being killed in the villages, being burned. You go to the Europe, if you complain to them, they say, well, we are very sorry, we are very sad about what's going on. So your sadness and your sorrow knows what brought to me. Thousands of people are being killed. I mean, even in Rojava, we have suffered a lot. So nobody can say, well, you should stop, you shouldn't do it. There should be kind of punishments to Turkey. Otherwise, it's becoming dangerous for all the world, I think. Somebody should say, stop Turkey, you are dangerous for the peace of the world. Somebody should say so. And the punishment, maybe if you are willing to do the embargoes or whatever it is, banning and so whatever, you should do it. Otherwise, I think we are going to face trouble in Europe and everywhere also. Now, what's going in Afrin, for example, in Serikani, in Tel Aviv, which we are suffering every day. They brought just those mercenaries and they left them to Afrin and using them. They are killing, they are kidnapping, they are torturing, doing everything. If you try to stop them, they say, well, you shouldn't touch it. You are terrorists. They are the Syrians. Protecting them and then leaving them to do whatever they do. Believe me, nobody over there in Afrin and Serikani and Tel Aviv can move without orders from Turkey. This is true. This is the reality. We know that. When they can't stop them, they can't stop them. But they never want to stop them. Why? If you would like to know, understand why, you have to refer to the Turkish history since 500 years ago, what they have done to the countries when they were invading, just leaving the people to kill and so. And then after 3 days or 4 days, they go in and say, well, I'm going to remedy it or to do something. So this is the way of doing it. So this tricks, I mean, is still going for Europe. Well, you say you have done so and so, you shouldn't do it. Say, well, of course, I have no idea. I didn't do it, and those mercenaries are doing it. I'll capture them and I do so and so, and it's lying. And I mean, the president of the state, how can be a liar? It is lying. They're lying to everybody, to Europe, to the countries, to the people. But nobody's saying you are lying. I mean, you just listen to them, what they're saying. We are listening to him. He's lying to everybody. So this is the truth. How you going to deal with those people are lying? You don't know the truth from the right, from the wrong things. And what he has done, I think, is the only way to have somebody to say, stop to Turkey. You are a member of NATO. You are a member of the European Council, whatever it is, you should do and do and do. Well, recently you can see the resolutions issued by the European Council and the Court of Europe, I mean, what they have done. No, not listening, I mean, they have article in their constitution that 90, I think the number, the constitution, I mean the rules of the court is higher than the rules of Turkey, they should be obeyed. They never did it. Everybody now, Mr. Kavala is still in prison, and Salatin Demirtas, and hundreds of them are still, and even the mayors of the cities are still captured, still and even the MP members, I mean. So they are not listening to anybody. There is somebody should say so. But if, I mean, those countries, Europe, if they don't do it because of they are going to lose 100 million euros or whatever it is against these humanitarian values, it means we are going to be killed, really. The humanitarian values, we are not doing anything to protect these values. And those values, I mean, is if we are still alive because of these values, we are still trying to protect these values. So if you, I mean, give up those values and go through for some amount of monies and so trade with the Turkish, going to lose everything. If you don't do it, maybe you are in Europe, you can follow what they have done, I mean. Well, I was in Europe, I mean, since 2012. I told many of them, said, well, what you are doing, all these mosques, those imams coming from Turkey, they are recruiting those people from here to all Salafis, to Syria, to the... Nobody listened to us. And now they can see what's going on too. So you should know the tricks of Turkey, what they are doing. And nobody, till now, nobody recognized those tricks by Turkey and these liars by Turkey, and even by the president of Turkey, which is lying to everybody. So somebody should say, stop to do it. And Mr. Ocalan, he knows all this reality. And he dealt with Turkey not now, from the beginning. Because of that, he is still trying to find a way for those people not to kill each other. You remember in 2013 till 2015, what happened? I mean, everybody was okay, and even in Rojava, we were fighting against Daesh and from the others, and everything was okay. So one person can persuade 40 million Kurds to do what he's doing, I mean, for peaceful, for living with the others, and his mentality, as you know, maybe Rojava, we are implementing his projects here, and everybody is happy, and even the Arabs, maybe some of you were in Rojava, you have talked to the Arab Syrians, everybody likes this model because the brotherliness, the freedom for women, for the people, they can express themselves as they want. They can study their histories, their language, their culture. So it's a freedom for everybody. So this is the mentality of Rojava. And they are afraid, I mean, especially Turkey are afraid of this mentality. And the Syrian regime also. And now we are banned by Turkey, by Syrian regime, by the others, just because of this model we are trying to implement here. And I hope, of course, it's struggle. We will keep, I mean, defending our values for the humanity, for the people, for the nations, for the will of the European people. We will defend these values because this is the right way. And we have paid, I mean, this amount of blood just to protect these values. We'll continue to do it. But I think the international people, just our friends like you and others, to know the reality and try to explain to the others that we are defending, I mean, their values, European values, people values. Everybody should know this reality and stand by us. Otherwise, Turkey will destroy everything. It's dangerous for all the world. Well, thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I will be ready to answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Salih Muslim, for your contribution on this panel and for our listeners as well. You have made a very important point, and the point is action is needed. There's been hundreds and hundreds of campaigns, plans, lobbying, as well as mobilization through international agencies as well as regional agencies. And it has all borne what? Turkey continues relentlessly doing what it's doing, and at the expense of the people and the communities in the region. Turkey itself Like Dr. Redcrow mentioned, over 4,000 or over 3,500 to 4,000 villages were destroyed. The people in Syria that were killed and burnt in the basements, as well as every day their proxies committing atrocities in Afrin and other areas in northeastern Syria. Those are the harsh realities that we need to understand and appreciate. That is what keeps the international momentum, and it is part of a multi-pronged approach. On the ground, the resistance against the occupier, internationally, the mobilization. And those are important things that you are saying, that we should continue with that conscientization, education, as well as lobbying in the different regions and different organizations we represent, so that the pressure must become action to tell Turkey enough is enough. You need to negotiate and you need to come to the table, release all the political prisoners. Abdullah Ocalan, Salahuddin Demirtas, as well as all the others that have been incarcerated for lengthy periods. Thank you very much for that, and to give us a sober and a wake-up call to say action is needed. There's enough of talk and theorizing, but we need action. We cannot implement any of those noble grand ideas. And the project of Rojava becoming infectious in the region, as well as other parts of the world. Look at post-colonial Africa. Look at countries that have been freed from the colonial yoke in South America. Look at Brazil, gone extremely to the other end as well. And the left is in tatters and itself fragmented. And the solutions, as well as the theoretical paradigm for the solutions we find that are so necessary in these conditions that we are experiencing in the region, as well as globally, is through Abdullah Ocalan's ideas on democratic confederalism, as well as the many books he's published under his dire conditions that have been made available to us, that should be disseminated and radically reinterpreted for the different regions that we come from, and in particular those who are bearing the brunt of Turkish oppression, as well as the oppression of other regional imperial role players. The international community and the strongest of the nations must stand up for that as well. I've been informed, and I was told by our hosts who have given us this opportunity to share our thoughts and ideas, the Civil Diplomacy Center, that there will not be a Q&A session, and that there must be a short rounding up and a conclusion of this panel, which I will now go ahead and do. I firstly must thank all panelists. Dr. Redcrow, thank you for your historical analysis, as well as your reinforcing the material conditions that shaped Abdullah Ocalan. And Mr. Salih Muslim himself said, we need to go back to the beginning. Both of you have emphasized the history of Turkey in its current state form, as well as its trajectory. Take the history of Turkey and its oppression, its conquest, as well as the extermination and genocide of different peoples, and then coming along to behave as saviors of some, like many of the imperial nations do and have done for us in South Africa, Africa, and the rest of the world that has borne the brunt of imperialism. Our panelist, Mr. Simon Dubbins, resolute in his continuous mobilization and action to bring pressure, even during the COVID context. All of us have done what we can with the constraints we have found ourselves in, and that is common from all of us. We all agree that the release of Abdullah Ocalan is paramount. Not only the improvement of his conditions, but his release, the sooner the better for Turkey, the region, and for global politics, because Turkey and its presence in Africa, in the Libyan conflict, as well as in Somalia, trying to reach its tentacles to many more countries on the continent, augurs negative rights of people, not only in the countries that Turkey is projecting its imperial goals and agenda, but also what's happening in the Mediterranean as well. Our comrade and colleague and activist and comrade, Ms. Laura Quagliuolo, as part of the most recent Imrali delegation, brought us to this panel personal insight from those who were interviewed as well, and share the human rights violations and abuses that are continuing in Turkey relentlessly. And that is why it's so important what Mr. Salih Muslim has brought to this panel. And he says that action is what is needed. Dr. Redcrow's analysis for praxis to take fruition with action, as well as Simon's continuous work and lobbying. Mr. Dubbins is correct, our comrade is correct. The contribution by the trade unions of Britain to the oppressed peoples in the world, from South Africa to Palestine, as well as the Cubans and all other oppressed peoples of the world, and in particular, their unapologetic stance for the freedom of the Kurdish people is not only an example, but it is an exemplar for all trade union movements and progressive organizations to do that. In South Africa, the Communist Party for decades has been a supporter of the Kurdish struggle. We are the ones who are waiting and awaiting that opportunity to come when Abdullah Ocalan is released, to hand over personally, and as our former and late leader here in South Africa, the late Judge Musa wanted, is to hand over the veterans of the armed struggle from Umkhonto we Sizwe, APLA, and all those who fought against apartheid, to hand over that award from the veterans to Abdullah Ocalan. That is the meaning, that is the effect that he has on us as well. The point is, we cannot progress with regards to the challenges faced with the Kurdish people unless Abdullah Ocalan is released. And I think this panel makes it very clear. And for all those who are listening and will listen when the translations go out, we thank you very much for the time you have spent. You have given to this panel as well, Dr. Redcrow, Laura Quagliuolo, Mr. Simon Dubbins, and Mr. Salih Muslim. Thank you very much all for your contributions. I wish you well and all the best.
Can I say a word, please? Can I say a word, please?
Please do, and go ahead. Anybody wants to say anything in closing, please go ahead.
I think the most important things now, especially, to ask Turkey to implement their laws and rules for Mr. Ocalan as they have done for the other prisoners. They are not obeying their rules and even laws. It's something very different. I mean, just keeping them isolated for 4 years, for 5 years. Nobody is done in all Turkey. So what we want, I mean, to ask them to implement their rules and the regulations for Mr. Ocalan, they're internal, not European, not our laws, not the humanitarian laws. Turkish laws should be implemented for Mr. Ocalan. This is the point I think everybody should ask for it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Muslim. Dr. Redcrow, you had your hand up. Please go ahead.
In closing, I would say, you know, we often, the international community, if they wonder what does Ocalan's ideas look like in practice, and we've actually seen them in practice. Anyone in the West who was inspired by the victory in Kobani, those are Ocalan's ideas that the fighters were carrying with them. It was Ocalan's ideas that the fighters were carrying when they liberated the ISIS capital of Raqqa, which is why his flag and picture was unveiled immediately following the battle. So it's not a mystery what his ideas lead to. And the United States government especially knows this. The United States government knows that it was the PKK guerrillas who saved the Yazidi people on Mount Sinjar in 2014. 40,000 Yazidis on a mountain saved by several dozen guerrillas. So the United States knows all of these things. And so it's incumbent that someone in the United States government finally start speaking the truth about this situation and stop cowtailing to, you know, Turkey's geostrategic value and stop letting them set the agenda, because we know what Ocalan's ideas look like in practice. And we're at a moment right now where you have to choose. Do you stand with Turkey and ISIS and similar groups in the Middle East, or do you stand with Ocalan's ideas in the Middle East? And the West gives lip service to Ocalan's ideas, but it's time that they actually start to honor them in practice. And ironically, lastly, I would say that it's really Ocalan who is the only person who can probably save Erdogan from the corner that he's painted himself in. It's only by negotiating peace with Ocalan that can save the Turkish lira, which is collapsing as we speak, can save the sort of Turkish government from probably collapse itself or perhaps another coup. And so you have this weird situation and irony where actually the Turkish state needs Ocalan as much as as he needs them, in the sense that they need to negotiate with him now, because if something were to happen to him before then, there won't be anyone else who can make that agreement, as I spoke about earlier. So I would say, you know, anyone in the English-speaking world who watches this, and if you find yourself admiring the fighters of the YPJ, and you wonder, okay, what is it that really inspired them? Then you should know that it's Ocalan's ideas and his books. And everyone out there should look up his books on the internet. They can be found. And a lot of them are translated in English, and read his ideas and understand how these ideas work in the real world, because they have a true effect on people. And they are the solution to a lot of the problems that we see in the Middle East. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Redcrow. Comrade Laura Quagliuolo, any last words in closing for us?
Okay, I'm unmuted. Well, first of all, I want to thank, I'm really honored to have been included in this panel. I think that, you know, the question of the solution, the political and democratic solution in Kurdistan, in Turkey, between the Kurdish movement and the Turkish state, is a matter also of you know, this solution on democratic basis is disturbing all powers that at the moment are benefiting from war-based policies. You know, it is really important to understand that the mechanisms that are behind, you know, recently our Prime Minister said, Ocalan is a dictator with whom we should, you know, deal with. This is what he said. Okay, never anybody said that publicly, you know, a prime minister especially. But, you know, the truth is that these powers don't want to, you know, give space to a democratic solution, because it's not making them, you know, benefit anymore from what they benefit from, all the wars that they are bringing around the world, and especially in the Middle East. So this is more or less my conclusion. I mean, all of your speeches were really interesting and made us a really, you know, clear picture of the situation. And thanks very much again.
Thank you very much, Comrade Laura Quagliuolo. And last, and Mr. Simon Dubbins, please share with us any closing comments. Thank you.
Mahmoud, I would simply say I think it's been an excellent discussion and putting the points across. I think obviously we're all agreed on the key issues without any shadow of a doubt. I suppose what I would finish on is reiterating again what you mentioned before, the call to action. It really is essential now that anybody that shares those basic core values gets on board with this campaign and makes things happen and builds that international political pressure to bring about the change. The world is probably in one of the most dangerous times it's been for many, many, many years. The Middle East is the center of this, and Öcalan's ideas and the struggle of the Kurdish people is our struggle. And anybody with those shared values must understand that. And I would say to the Kurdish people, difficult as times are at the moment, and we all follow what's going on intensively, don't let your heads go down, because your struggle has been such an inspiration for others as well. You have achieved unbelievable progress in the face of unbelievably bad odds with the might of Turkey and others. What you've done is an inspiration for everybody and for humanity. And Mahmoud, I'm sure you, more than anybody, in the dark days of apartheid and the struggles that you had there when things looked like it might never end, you needed things to keep going. And the international struggle was always so important to your struggle, and together we all came through it together. And I'm sure that we can do this with Öcalan and the struggle of the Kurdish people too.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Simon Dubbins. Thank you, Dr. Redcrow, Comrade Laura Quagliuolo, and Mr. Salih Muslim. All the best, comrades, and yours in international solidarity. Thank you.
Hello, my friends. On behalf of Civil Diplomacy Center, we want to thank you. And it was a great pleasure to know you and work with you. Thank you for all of you.
Thank you for what you do and all your work, and you are really an inspiration. So
thank you too.
Yeah, thank you to everyone there at the center. I think the discussion was very good, and I saw it was broadcast live over Facebook and different places, and there was a lot of people watching when I checked. So I'm glad. I think I look forward to the translations and things that get put out there as well, so that many different languages can hear our speeches. And it was an Thoreau Salih, it was an honor to be on the panel with you as well and hear your speech. And I appreciate meeting you. I've dealt with a lot of, I've never met you personally, so it was nice to be on the panel with you.
thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Good night to everybody. I mean, it's almost night here in US and the place where you are, but